theory, and certain forms of interpretive sociology, anthropology, and linguistic analysis. Subjectivism fails to grasp the social ground that shapes consciousness, while objectivism does just the opposite, failing to recognize that social reality is to some extent shaped by the conceptions and representations that individuals make of the social world. Symbolic aspects of social life are inseparably intertwined with the material conditions of existence, without one being reducible to the other. Bordeaux formally defines habitus as the system of durable, transposable dispositions, structured structures predisposed to function as structuring structures, that is, as principles which generate and organize practices and representations that can be objectively adapted to their outcomes, without presupposing a conscious aiming at ends or an expressed mastery of the operations necessary in order to attain them. The habitus is sometimes described as a feel for the game, a practical sense that inclines agents to act and react in specific situations in a manner that is not always calculated and is not simply a question of conscious obedience to rules. Two forms of capital are particularly important in the field of cultural production. Symbolic capital refers to a degree of accumulated prestige, celebrity, consecration, or honor, and it is founded on a dialectic of knowledge and recognition. Cultural capital concerns forms of cultural knowledge, competences, or dispositions. Bordeaux defines cultural capital as a form of knowledge, an internalized code, or a cognitive acquisition which equips the social agent with empathy towards, appreciation for, or competence in deciphering cultural relations and cultural artifacts. Cultural field exists in a subordinate or dominated position within the field of power, whose principle of legitimacy is based on possession of economic or political capital. It is situated within the field of power because of its possession of a high degree of symbolic forms of capital, but in a dominated position because of its relatively low degree of economic capital. Posits again, like Bordeaux, that formal and historical concerns are inseparable, that human consciousness and thought are socially constituted, and that possibilities of action are socially and historically situated and defined. It can also arise in the presentation of a work corresponding to one extremity of the field before an audience corresponding structurally to the other extremity. When an avant-garde play is performed to a bourgeois audience, or the contrary, as more often happens, it is significant that breaks with the most orthodox works of the past with the belief they impose on the newcomers, often takes the form of parody, which presupposes and confirms emancipation. This explains why writers' efforts to control the reception of their own work are always partially doomed to failure, if only because the very effect of their work may transform the conditions of its reception, and because they would not have had to write many things they did right and write them as they did. Michael Foucault gives the name field of strategic possibilities to the regulated system of differences and dispersions within which each individual work defines itself. The work of art is an object which exists as such only by virtue of the collective belief which knows and acknowledges it as a work of art. The production of discourse about the work of art is one of the conditions of production of the work. The educational system plays a decisive role in the generalized imposition of the legitimate mode of consumption. Given that works of art exist as symbolic objects, only if they are known and recognized, that is, socially instituted as works of art and received by spectators capable of knowing and recognizing them as such, the sociology of art and literature has to take it as its objects not only the material production, but also the symbolic production of the work. Circe by Madeline Miller. Could not have bungled that anymore. Father's halls were dark and silent. His palace was a neighbor to Oceanosis, buried in the earth's rock, and its walls were made of polished obsidian. Why not? They could have been anything in the world. blood-red marble from Egypt or balsam from Araby. My father had only to wish it so, but he liked the way the obsidian reflected his light, the way its slick surfaces caught fire as he passed. Of course, he did not consider how black it would be when he was gone. My father had never been able to imagine the world without himself in it. It was my first lesson. Beneath the smooth, familiar face of veins is another that waits to tear the world in two. A strange feeling was rising in me, a sort of humming in my chest, like bees at winter's thaw. I walked to my father's treasury, filled with its glittering riches, golden cups shaped like the heads of bulls, necklaces of lapis and amber, silver tripods, and coarse chiseled bowls with swan neck handles. My favorite had always been a dagger, with an ivory haft carved like a lion's face. The king had given it to my father in hopes of gaining his favor. And did he? I once asked my father. No, my father had said. Beautiful Scylla, dainty, doe-eyed Scylla, Scylla with her viper heart. Why had she done such a thing? It was not love. I'd seen the sneer in her eyes when she spoke of his flippers. Perhaps it was because she loved my sister and brother, who scorned me. Perhaps it was because her father was a nothing river, and her mother was a shark-faced sea nymph, and she liked the thought of taking something from the daughter of the sun. It did not matter. All I knew was that I hated her, for I was like any dull ass who has ever loved someone who loved another. I thought, if only she were gone, it would change everything. The night air tingled across my skin. The grass was dry, flattened by high summer heat. I found the hill and halted up its slope. In the starlight, the flowers looked small, blood gray and faint. I plucked a stalk and held it in my hand. It lay there limp, all its sap dried and gone. What had I thought would happen? That I would leap up and shout, "Your father is wrong. You changed Scylla and Glaucus. You were not born Patchy, but Zeus come again." My brother nodded gravely, but I saw the smile in his eyes. I can veil the sky itself. Just try to watch me.